Welcome into your PFF Draft Review, powered by PFF Edge and Elite. Today it's all about the Oakland Raiders, Sam, and their draft, breaking it down where some of their first few picks were a little bit lower on our draft board, but some of their later picks were higher on our draft board. It's one of those things, if you flip it a little bit, it looks a little bit better, at least from our draft board perspective.
This is one of the more interesting drafts in the entire league because at least you can see a trend. You know, we've talked before about what is the message, what is the way these teams are drafting. With the Raiders, you can see exactly what they were doing. They were drafting players that had, it's like they were looking at it from a video game, you know? And they were drafting everybody that had a potential rating of 90 plus, regardless of what their current stats are. So everybody on this list is all about those words that we don't like. It's potential and upside. And if all these guys actually reach that potential and upside, this is a home run of a draft. The question is, what are the chances of that?
The first 6 picks actually do resemble that remark. You know, some of them are better on the field than others, but if they do hit, including our favorite Maurice Hurst, we'll talk about him in a minute, then it is an incredible draft. Let's start in round 1. It was Colton Miller out of UCLA. It did seem like the Raiders went into this draft saying, we need tackles. We need 1 or 2 tackles. Maybe they had Mike McGlinchey higher than Colton Miller. McGlinchey comes off the board at 9. They're sitting there at 10. They trade back to 15, still get Colton Miller.
And that's big.
Oh yeah, well, at least it was smart. Instead of taking Miller at 10, they did at least accumulate some assets, get Miller at 15. He did have a solid PFF grade last year, was strong pass blocking efficiency grade, but on the field when he did lose, it was really ugly, and that gave our scouts a little bit of concern for his prospects at the next level.
Yeah, allowed 16 total pressures last year, which is good. The PFF grade, as you said, was very good, but the tape showed some inconsistency there, and there was definite inconsistency when it came to his hand usage. When you saw him lose, he would tend to go in for his punch and just get swatted aside immediately, and that's very bad news because you are beaten at that point. You're done. And what happens after that, whether it's a sack, a hit, or a hurry, has nothing to do with you. It's all about whether the quarterback gets the ball out in time or not. The other thing is, for a guy whose main selling point was testing in like the 99th percentile in terms of movement skills, athleticism, that really didn't show up all that often on tape, particularly when it came to pass protection, I think, pass sets. Where it really jumped out is when you saw him on outside zone plays. He was able to run with athletic linebackers, even defensive linemen certainly, and there you really saw an athlete. But when it came to pass protection, I'm just not sure you saw this 99th percentile kind of athlete leaping off the tape towards you.
Yeah, I mean, the outside zone plays certainly stood out. He has that ability to sustain blocks on the move, so that works well. Pass protection will be an issue. Also, his career arc, his flow, also a bit of an issue. Again, part of the reason why he was a little bit lower on our draft board, despite an 87.2 PFF grade last year, he was a 62.9 just the year before. So when you're looking at these guys, it is the total body of work that doesn't have to be accounted for. And with Miller, pretty good as a true freshman, pretty bad as a sophomore, much better as a junior. But even on that junior tape, his losses, both in the run game and in pass protection, they were ugly. They were bad losses. They were bigger losses. So there are some question marks there. But athletic, looks the part. That's the same deal with interior defensive lineman P.J. Hall. 2nd round, Sam Houston State, explosive on film, and just a freak of an athlete who ran a 4.73 despite being over 300 pounds.
And then in the 3rd round, they did the same thing. They went back and took Brandon Parker, an offensive tackle from North Carolina A&T, double dipping on the small schools in the 2nd and 3rd round. And Parker really is a kind of poor man's Colton Miller in terms of his selling point is looking like a freaky athlete, is moving like a skill position player. And we saw that at the Senior Bowl, which is where we got a really good look at this guy for a full week of practice. His movement skills looked fantastic. He looked incredible. He was one of the first guys I noticed because he just moved differently to all the other offensive tackles out there. So one of the things I went doing when I was looking through those practice films is, wow, who's this guy? Figured out who it was, looked up his name on the roster, then went and checked the PFF grading. We graded every snap, every rep of practice during the Senior Bowl week. You can find that all in your PFF draft guide. We are the only people that has that because of a partnership with the Senior Bowl. So I dove straight into his PFF grading for those reps, for those practices, and they were terrible. Not what I was expecting to see, given a guy that was that athletic.
Yeah.
So they've taken a guy who is an incredible athlete, but so far has not really shown he can do that as a football player. And again, we're going to see if they can get potential out of him because he is that freaky athletic.
So he struggled in the game as well. He gave up 5 pressures on 36 pass blocking attempts, which doesn't sound like much, but you have to put it in perspective. That's almost 20% of his reps giving up a pressure. You want that to be, the average is generally around 10%. You obviously want that to be a lot lower. So he even struggled in the Senior Bowl. So there's some projection there with Parker. Then the draft started to flip a little bit, at least in our world, because with Arden Key, Nick Nelson, and Maurice Hurst, we'll go through them. But Arden Key, the second, third round pick that they had, number 87 overall, right around where we had him slotted on our draft board, a guy who at one point in his career looked like a future first round pick. He was, 6'6", 240. When he's a freshman or a sophomore with that type of long, lanky frame and just winning off the edge with his burst, you're thinking, man, he's got the frame to add 15 or 20 pounds. I guess the issue there, besides some off-field concerns, quit the team, other question marks, he just never really bulked up and added the weight to truly add that NFL defensive end build. So I think there's, the possibility for him to get back to that early career pass rushing productivity that he showed, but I think there's a reason why he ended up in the third round, and the size was one of them.
Yeah, and if you look at this chart right here, you can see he had 140 total career quarterback pressures in just 820 pass rushing snaps. That's pressure on over 17% of his pass rushes, which is an extremely high rate. That's right up there with guys like Bradley Chubb. It's not quite what Harold Landry was able to do in 2016, but that 2016 season from Harold Landry was the best season of pass rushing we have seen from any edge rushing prospect in this draft. So Arden Key for his career has been an incredibly productive pass rusher. The question is, can you get past all of those mitigating factors? The fact that there's some off-field issues, the fact that he is incredibly slight, 6'6", and weighing in around 240 pounds. That is concerning. It would be less of an issue if he was a short, stocky pass rusher, but because he's so long and lean, that is a concern because the guys in recent years that have come out and been that slim, it's like a who's who of disastrous draft decisions. I mean, including one the Raiders made in Shalik Calhoun. He was a guy who also graded extremely well at PFF, was incredibly slight, just did not have the weight and the size on the edge, and has been virtually anonymous in the NFL.
So then in the fourth round, they go Nick Nelson, Wisconsin cornerback, a guy that had one of the best grades in the nation last year and one of the biggest surprise players in the country. That was a surprise breakout season for him, allowed only 37.7% of targets to be completed into his coverage. That's fantastic. That's right around the spike in the ball, right? Quarterback just spikes at 39.6, is that right?
Well, that's passer rating, not pressure, not a percentage completion rate.
You're right. I tried to steal your line and I
know.
screwed
See, this
it up.
is why you leave the good lines to the professionals. Stay in your lane, Steve.
I didn't even plan on that. Tell me about Nick Nelson, though. I know you did most of the hard scouting on him.
I thought he was fantastic last year. People are going to look at the fact that he only had or didn't have any interceptions and think that's an issue, but he largely played man coverage, and typically guys playing man coverage do not have a lot of interceptions because they're not looking for the ball most of the time. They've got their eyes on the receiver. They're trying to make sure they're in tight man coverage and not let the ball in. So I'm not hugely concerned by that. He had 29 pass breakups over his college career, which is a big number that more than offsets the fact that he didn't pick passes off. What concerns me is that he had one season of big-time production. And not that in and of itself is not concerning as much as 2 of those previous seasons were at the University of Hawaii. And if you would expect a guy to play well in previous years, it would be against lower competition. So I'm not entirely certain why he did not dominate a lower level of competition, then showed up in the Big Ten and suddenly was fantastic. That is a question that needs answering to me.
And then it's round 5. We were wondering why Maurice Hurst, the interior defensive lineman from Michigan, was falling. I mean, we knew that there was rumors about a heart condition, or there was a legit heart condition. We didn't know how serious it was. It was serious enough for a number of teams to take him off the board. We still don't know the exact terms. We don't know the exact condition itself. So let's just describe him on the field. He is the highest graded interior defensive lineman we've ever had that 2017 season, a 96.5. Let's just stack it up against some of the better seasons we've seen at that position. 4 years of grading, and our pass rush and run stopping grades for interior defensive linemen have translated extremely well at the NFL level so far. That's what made us truly love Maurice Hurst, besides just generally watching him on the field. That 96.5, the best we've ever seen. Guys like DeForest Buckner, who have been excellent in the NFL. Buckner, Vita Vea also in this draft class, but Henry Anderson's been very good in the NFL when healthy. Jonathan Allen also looked very good before he got hurt. Leonard Williams, playing like the top 6 pick that he was. Sheldon Rankins has been solid as well. So Hurst is the best of all those guys, and last year, the number 1 grade as a pass rusher, number 1 grade as a run stopper, just your classic interior disruptor at defensive tackle.
Yeah, there were reports that teams thought this guy was more like a second-round pick. He didn't have perfect tape. Nobody has perfect tape, but when you go through and you grade every single snap of his and every single snap of everybody else's, exactly what PFF does in college football, he just is head and shoulders above anybody else. The flaws that you see on tape, they're definitely there, but you need to quantify how often they're happening versus how often he's doing something fantastic, and it's just night and day. He is a top 5 talent in this draft. When healthy, he is a dominant force. Then the only question becomes what you make of the heart condition, and the bottom line is, according to Adam Schefter, 2 separate medical professionals have cleared him to play. Michigan, Harvard doctors have said he can resume football activities. At that point in the 5th round, he is more than worth the risk. The only question becomes, do you want to get involved in the potential risk factor that is? What happens if his heart condition does become an issue? But in the 5th round, you're not expecting these guys to produce much at all. So if he lasts any time in the NFL before being forced to retire, he's more than justified that selection.
Yeah, you can get a lot out of him. He's 290 pounds, low pad level, burst off the line of scrimmage. He really does have it all. And this was not a one-year wonder like we talked about with Nick Nelson. He did this as part of a rotation in Michigan 2015 and 16, played 382 snaps in 2015, 328 in 2016 before taking on that full-time role in 2017. And when you look at 2015 and 16, he was just as productive in those 700 or so snaps. So it's 3 years of domination from Maurice Hurst. We hope he's okay. We hope he can truly contribute, because if he is healthy and on the field, we do think he'll be one of the best players in the draft, despite being in the 5th round.
And then the other guy that I would mention from this draft class is in the 7th round, they got Marcel Aitman, who was the other wide receiver at Oklahoma State. So,
sometimes looked better than James Washington,
absolutely.
though, the guy that went in the 2nd round.
He is a long receiver. He made big plays at times for Mason Rudolph there. He was one of the highest graded receivers in the nation. Also had an impressive blocking grade, which is going to help him at least get on the field in terms of special teams and doing the things the coaches like to see, especially given that they're going to be running the 1998 offense here. We're going to want to see some grit in the run game here.
Appreciate you breaking out the run blocking grade for the wide receiver.
I think Marcel Aitman has a chance to stick and contribute there.
Yeah, he did have the number 4 passer rating when targeted in the entire draft class among all draft eligible wide receivers. Big frame that you can at least use on slants, fades, and he's pretty nifty facing press coverage. Number 2 passer rating when targeted against press. So we had him as higher than a 7th round pick. I know why he fell, 4.62 at 6'4". It's not the greatest time, but I do think there's something there, especially with the way Derek Carr loves to throw fades and back shoulders. I think Aitman could be a really big weapon. If they give him the opportunity, could be one of the steals in this draft.
Yeah, so overall it was a confusing draft, an interesting draft, but I think it probably evened out to being a pretty reasonable one.
It did. We have the grade on ProFootballFocus.com. You guys can go and check it out. That is your Oakland Raiders draft recap powered by PFF Edge and Elite.